I assume there's going to be some editing here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So they are a route, like the safest route available to us to take our kids to and from school. We bike them exclusively to and from school. It's also like the safest route for me to go to work. I bike exclusively to and from work. We've been doing this ever since they were like old enough to go to school, and my wife and I have made a commitment for, because of the climate crisis and for the sake of their future, to do everything we can. And so that means we are, walking the walk of making as many bicycle trips as possible to avoid, car use whenever able to, and also essentially like being an example and proselytizing to other people that like this is possible. You can take your kids to and from school. You can get to and from work. It's not something exclusively for bicycle racers who are in spandex from head to toe. Like, this is something that much of the world outside of the United States does just for their transportation. So it is, the greenways are imperfect, but they're, as it currently stands, one of the safest ways we have to commute. They have, some areas, speed bumps. Again, it's a low barrier, but it might disincentivize people who want to race through intersections from going on those roads. Exactly. And there are some areas like down the street here where there are some diverters so that cars don't assume that these roads are thoroughfares. They will have to veer around, so that might discourage them from going on those roads. There needs to be infrastructure that does not physically allow cars to go where they're not supposed to go. If there are just flexible posts that cars can run through, then they will run through them. And it's not necessarily that cars are intending to go through them, but they're much more aware and I think cautious if they are in their car thinking, if I hit that cement post, I'm going to damage my car. If there is a flexible post, they are much less likely to exert the same amount of caution. They're likely to drive much faster around that. So for the sake of bicyclists, there really needs to be solid infrastructure that physically separates people as much as possible. I think it's a slow process. I think it requires more people to be on bikes. In places like Europe, in Northern Europe, where we think of them as bicycling havens, it was startling to learn that 30 years ago, it was absolutely the opposite. It was as bad, oftentimes as bad as it is here, that the infrastructure was completely set up for cars, but with a continual process of setting up the infrastructure and getting people on bikes. Now you'd have no idea that just a couple of decades ago it was not the case. But the more people who are on bikes, then people in Europe are much more aware of bicyclists because they're the norm. They're very common, and everyday people see it as a viable form of transportation. So I think we need to make the bike infrastructure separated and safe. And then if we get, once there's more people on bicyclists, the more people on bikes, then cars are much more aware that they need to be, watching all the time for these, and they also see them as, this is your neighbor, this is your family member who also bikes as well. So it needs to be not a niche, but something that is much more common, and to make it more common we need to make it as safe as possible so that more people get on bikes. For anyone driving, try it yourself. You'll have a completely different perspective being on a bike, seeing what it's like to go through intersections and have cars whizzing by you. If you are really thinking about trying, find someone else who does it. Find a neighbor, somebody who commutes their kids to and from school. Ask them about it. They'll be happy to talk to you about it. Like we have helped friends find the safest route to get to and from school. We have, like I said, loaned out our bikes for them to try. You're not alone, and really the reason we're doing this is for our children. Everybody, even if you're in your cars, drivers, they love their children, and a lot of the calculation goes into like what's safe for my children. In general, they are the places that we feel safest to take the kids to and from school, which is the most critical thing. Is we lose sleep about getting the kids to and from school. We have had, even on the greenways, some very close encounters. There have been a couple that have been extremely close, and it's my wife has been pretty traumatized by a couple of those experiences of drivers not paying attention, blowing out through a stop sign without looking, and if she is not paying 100% attention 100% of the time, it can be life-threatening. When you have infrastructure that allows people to safely bike, it allows pedestrians to walk around. When you're not building roads that are 4, 6 lanes or more wide, and they are 2-lane streets, and there are traffic calming measures, then people feel more comfortable being in those spots. Then it helps the businesses there. It just makes the city much more livable and more pleasant. So all these efforts go hand in hand. All these things that go into making cities more livable, also makes biking safer as well. I will say that I really feel that the advent of electric bikes really opened things up. I get to and from work without an electric bike, but I know I'm not the norm, and I live relatively close to work, but the kids' school is actually a good distance away, and as they're getting older and getting bigger, the hauling them around becomes more difficult. But and especially Portland being somewhat hilly, having the electric assist really opens things up for people. So I think it's a great entryway into get people getting on bikes more often.